Hey everybody, it's Phil Strazul from Select Software Reviews, back with another interview with an industry leader. I'm here with Siadhal Magos from Metaview. Thanks so much for joining us. Do you mind giving us a quick background on yourself and kind of what you're up to?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Siadhal Magos, co-founder at Metaview. Metaview is all about helping organizations run higher quality and higher velocity interview processes. Really cut my teeth as a hiring manager while I was at Uber. So I was at Uber at a time when it was growing like crazy, and was sort of constantly reminded that interviews were this big black hole essentially in the recruiting process. Not that they were treated incredibly importantly. Everyone took it very seriously. We put a ton of effort into them, but we really had no idea what was happening in them, and very little idea if we were being sort of consistent in how we ran those interviews. And that's really what Metaview is a reaction to. So Metaview records, transcribes, and really importantly, automatically summarizes your interviews, so that you as an interviewer don't have to focus so much on taking notes. You can actually focus on giving the candidate a great experience. You don't have to spend time writing up your notes afterwards, because we do and package that all for you. Plus, you have a bunch more visibility into what is actually happening in the interviews across the company.
That's awesome. It reminds me a little bit of like a gong and having that like intelligence in the conversation. Is there like a training aspect as well, where you're giving interviewers coaching tips based on how their processes are run?
Yeah, so there's a ton of sort of almost like knock-on applications. Once you sort of realize the benefits of capturing these conversations, there's a ton of benefits. One is the summarization that I mentioned, which is a real game changer just for like individual productivity. When you don't have to do that sort of really rote task, and you don't have to even as an interviewer sort of take a deep breath before the interview, crack your knuckles, and get ready to type down everything they said. That's a real game changer for interview quality as well. So there's that way that we sort of get a bunch of feedback that we improve quality. But then, because actually our software is in the interview and sort of, able to observe what's happening, playing back to interviewers things like how long they were speaking compared to the candidate, how many questions they asked compared to how many questions other people tend to ask in this interview, identifying questions that were asked in a sort of a super complicated way, not in a concise way, we do as well. So there's a bunch of these sort of like really tangible, really delightful feedback moments that you can give to both recruiters and interviewers. That helps with that training aspect. I'd also add to that another really, you mentioned sort of the equivalency to Gong. A great way that people learn is through observing someone who's great at something, and actually having recordings is another really. That's one of the ways that Metaview helps with training folks. When you have recordings of your sort of really tenured interviewers who do a great job at this certain interview, and you can really identify literally the time when they nailed this interview, and we're going to train now everyone based on that recording. That's magical, right? Because you're not having to just say, hey, listen to Phil do it next time. Hopefully he does a good job. Hopefully the candidate is representative, and fingers crossed. You're actually picking the best interview. Everyone listen to this before you start interviewing. And it's just a game changer for your sort of calibration and consistency of your interviewing.
That's awesome. I know also, to some extent, interviewing is a bit of a game of telephone when you've got somebody doing the front end screens, whether they're in your company or a third-party recruiter. And perhaps like there's also a difference in skill sets, where maybe somebody doing the first screen is not a sales manager, doesn't understand those competencies, isn't a technical person, doesn't understand the engineering competencies, et cetera. And so having really robust notes is phenomenal to pass along. So
yeah, robust and concise, right? There's a transcription is great, and it's definitely a really important thing, that part of our product. But a transcription of a sort of a 1 hour long interview, that's also pretty dense. There's probably like moments in it that matter, not necessarily the whole thing that you need to review. And so the ability to identify those moments is actually where I think is where you really make a difference, actually.
Do you think this sort of interview intelligence technology is most impactful for certain types of roles or certain like candidate personas, or is it actually pretty broad, whether you're hiring, for retail or an executive?
So I think there's sort of two sides to interview intelligence. One is helping interviewers do a better job. And by a better job, I mean both run a better interview and make a sort of a better decision as a result of the process. And that world, we tend to focus on sort of knowledge work. Companies that hire a lot of knowledge workers, a lot of create people who do creative jobs. A couple of reasons for that. One, the interview process itself tends to be, though structured, it's usually semi-structured. You don't usually you're not running a great process if you literally have a script of every question to ask. You want your interviewers to be following up on certain red flags or adapting based on how the candidate is responding to certain questions, because you're really trying to tease out where does this person fall on a quite high definition spectrum of experience, quality, this sort of thing. Whereas maybe in some other sort of more in other types of jobs, it's more sort of candidate, they do the job yes or no, and it's a bit more transactional. So we tend to focus on those more creative knowledge worker roles. So yeah, that's what. But I don't think that's necessarily true for the category as a whole. I just think it's different products will initially focus on different parts of the market and therefore lean into different parts of it with their functionality. The other side of it I was going to say that's really important from interview intelligence is you think about, okay, so we mentioned the quality of the interview and the quality of the decision. Then there's just the actual raw time saving and productivity increases that you can afford for the people who interview a lot. And then I think in that world, it's a lot more sort of industry or job type agnostic. It's just, can you make it so that I don't have to spend energy during an interview taking notes? So I have this precious time with the candidate, but my head is down typing away. And after the interview, I'm rapidly trying to package something together. Or 2 days after the interview, I have to sort of make up my opinion because I didn't write good notes. If you can take those things away, that's a little bit more sort of, I think, industry agnostic, and also a sort of a big part of what we do.
That's amazing. I think this interview intelligence category is super interesting. It feels like you're obviously 10x expert than I am. It feels like something that has really emerged just in the last few years. And sure. I'm curious where you think it's going from here.
Obviously a lot remains to be played out. And I guess when I think of interview intelligence, I don't actually think of the category a ton, right? I think about our company, our product, and our mission and vision. So I think it sort of relates to the two ways that I mentioned previously, which is around this sort of productivity gains that are really, really there's been a bit of a revolution in that over the last few months. We're having this conversation in early March 2023. Really for this calendar year, people have been AI has been top of everyone's mind, and people have been sort of using ChatGPT for their own personal productivity and using sort of a bunch of other tools as well to help with that. That sort of productivity, sort of generational, once in a generation productivity turbocharge, that's going to affect the people who do a lot of interviewing, a lot of hiring. They're going to experience that 10x increase in their personal productivity around some of the administrative tasks around interviewing, so that they can focus just on running a great conversation. I think that there's all manner of long tail of ways that will change how people work. That sort of maybe is tough to go into in this call. Then I think there's the quality, again, the quality of the process. And I think the way that I see that going is, I believe that actually the most compelling, the most important data in all of your hiring process is in the conversations you're having with candidates. So if you're the platform, if you're the tool, if you have a tool that is capturing what I believe is the most important data in your whole hiring process, then actually there start to be a whole lot more of maybe your workflow that start to sort of get attached to that platform. Maybe if you're where given I know I've been part of hundreds of hiring decisions, I know that when you're making hiring decisions as a group, you're doing it based on what you learned in the interviews. So at the moment, for most companies if they don't have interview intelligence place, that means they're getting together and discussing what they remember being discussed in interviews. If you're a Metaview customer, that means you're getting around and actually looking at what happened in this interview, and someone has an opinion that sort of differs with this person. And then you're obviously going and making that decision somewhere else. But the way we see it going is actually the act of hiring right now does not have a home. You log the outcome in certain systems, you run the process in other systems, you converse about or collaborate about the decision in other places. There's no home where the act of hiring happens. And I think that's what interview intelligence actually is I don't really care too much about the category personally. I care more about our company. That's what we see as being sort of the big change, somewhere where people whose a big part of their job is hiring, be that recruiters or be that hiring managers or other interviewers, there's a home where they're going to have at their fingertips all of the most pertinent information to help them make an amazing decision. The best starting point is interviews, because that's the most important data, but there's other data points too.
Are you guys able to see the results of these hires and sort of feed the beast a little bit in terms of like understanding, down funnel, hey, this person's amazing, and like here are the signals that we could have picked up on, sort of thing, and therefore when you're interviewing, you should be looking for XYZ.
I guess it's a half yes. So what we do is based on hiring quality, the quality of a hiring decision, which is, always hard to measure, but there's certain signs you can have, did they churn after 3 or 6 months, performance reviews, and just general sort of hiring manager sentiment towards that person. You can identify, well, what are the characteristics of the interviewing that tends to lead to a high quality decision? That is part of our platform. In terms of picking up on signals in the candidate, we leave that to our customers. If you had to our users, if you had a hiring decision that didn't work out, of course you can go back and review the game tape and sort of pore over it and understand, well, what did we get wrong here? And, feed your own, change your interview structure as a result, or change your rubric, or just frankly reflect on it as a hiring manager, whatever it might be. Of course you have that capability. But in terms of our platform doing that in any form of like automated AI-driven way, we don't do that. We don't think that's the decision on candidates is very much a sort of a human thing. What we're more about is sort of augmenting that with insights, but rather than just memory.
So it sounds like philosophically, if you could flip a switch tomorrow and have all this data flowing back from performance management, from the HRIS, et cetera, you actually probably wouldn't do it because you want the hiring manager or the recruiter to sort of make these decisions as a person versus like an algorithm saying, hey, Phil answered the question in this way, and therefore we think that he's not a structured thinker and he's not going to do well as a product manager.
Yeah. That the sort of narrative that you gave there is like very antithetical to how we think about it. Highlighting facts to people about sort of how this interview went compared to other top performers in the company, that's very on mission aligned for us. But sort of making actual recommendations is not on candidates. Is not where we play.
Yeah, and I think what's sort of interesting is there actually is even legislation in process to stop automated assessments, which is sort of a broad term, but I think that's probably smart, and I hope that's the way that the world evolves, generally speaking, because it feels like a decent amount of time before these algorithms can be as good as human intuition.
Yeah, there's too many. I mean, honestly speaking, there's too many parameters, right? Like, do you even trust? How much do you really trust the performance reviews, right? So if you see cases of this all the time where some unnamed large company produces an AI product that has some inherent biases in it, and it turns out because all of the data you were feeding it based on was actually was like 2 degrees off, and that's just been extrapolated now to like a real in your face problem. Completely sort of, I think there's too many parameters. We as human beings don't understand all the parameters, and that's why our approach is much more, hey, let's make sure you have access to everything you need. You're still going to have to make the call. You're still going to have to exercise business judgment around what's right for this person, right for this hire. You may have a belief that the business context has changed since all of the people we've hired in the past who have had great performance reviews, and that's good. You should be empowered to do that. We don't want to be getting in the way of that. But what we do want is for you to have that information, whether that's information meaning access to what did this candidate actually say, or whether that's information in terms of how did other candidates react in this situation. We want you to have that at your fingertips.
One of the things I'm really curious about is, and of course is the topic of the day, and maybe it'll be the topic for a long time. You're obviously pretty close to using some of these more advanced artificial intelligence technologies in actual business applications. Do you have any thoughts on how this new paradigm is going to change other parts of HR and recruiting?
Probably not super educated ones, to be honest. We really focus on how we can leverage what is a pretty foundational shift in what's possible to help companies run higher quality interview processes. So I haven't spent a ton of time thinking beyond that. I think one way that is like tangential to what we do is obviously just like a more intuitive way to access what is like often pretty granular pieces of information. So obviously large organizations spend a ton of time trying to find candidates who maybe they've historically spoken to, who meet some sort of pretty like low fidelity shape of what we're looking for in a candidate, when actually what you're really interested in is, hey, I'm looking for someone who wants to work in person in San Francisco and has these set of skills and demonstrated some really great leadership sort of capabilities during their interviews, right? That's like actually what you're trying to, it's just you currently use a system where you say you tick a load of other boxes instead, and it doesn't really, you still have like a really low, I don't want to say a low quality list of candidates, because of course there'll be great people on the list, but low accuracy return out of the system. And I think that will change, where people get these much more sort of specific queries. And I think there's a load of ways you can imagine that way beyond our product that you can imagine that being the case. But overall, yeah, I'm pretty don't spend a ton of time thinking there. I think the one of the things that these foundational shifts in sort of the capabilities of AI and like the way they're now exposed to companies like ours is great for is making sense of unstructured data. And by far, the biggest source of unstructured data in hiring is conversations and interviews. So I actually think that is probably the main place where you're going to start to see this technology being used, because everything else in the hiring process was already pretty well sort of, there was an ontology that existed. There was metadata associated with the different stages and different tags and different capabilities. It's the conversations that the super sort of unstructured thing that now people are trying to make sense of.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting idea to talk or to think about. Where is this technology going to play a role, and how's it going to change the way people do work and get jobs? I really appreciate your time. If somebody's watching this and wants to learn more about yourself or your business, how can they find you?
Best bet is head to our website, metaview.ai. Ton of useful information there, ton of useful resources as well. And definitely get in touch via the website with a member of the team, and happy to sort of happy for you to take the product for a spin. We have a really lightweight way to get exposure to the product. It's obviously a really, really fresh and new category. So people are often curious about, well, how does this work really? And then, oftentimes are pretty blown away when they take it for a spin. So definitely feel free to do that. Or of course, reach out to me directly if you'd like. My email address is SM. So that's the letter S, the letter M for mother, metaview.ai. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Sal, thank you so much for your time.